Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ashar Sayed, the Public Relations Director for the Mahdi Youth Society and your host for tonight. Today we are gathered in a virtual setting for a second time to offer our community some guidance when it comes to choosing educational streams and career pathways. This program is called University Seminar, and tonight we are focusing on law and engineering. We are honored to have a number of professionals from our community who have taken a number of different pathways who will be sharing their experiences and offering some tips so that we can all take advantage of. The format of this event will start with introductions to these professionals, followed by interactive presentations from these speakers, followed by questions that I will be asking them. And after all the presentations, we will be having an interactive question and answer session based off of questions that we receive from you through the YouTube live chat. So if any of you have any questions, please feel free to add them into the YouTube live chat option. We will be having one more seminar after this, taking place next Saturday, November 28th, for Life, Health Science, and Medicine, and this will also take place at 5:15 p.m. after Maghrib, just like tonight. I'd like to take a moment and introduce the speakers for tonight. So, representing law, we have Sister Maryam Samani. She is a third-year law student at the University of Toronto, Faculty of Law. Sister Maryam completed her undergraduate studies in psychology at York University and was the recipient of the Governor General's Silver Medal for achieving the highest GPA out of all graduates every year. In law school, Sister Maryam is the president of the Muslim Law Student Association and has also been involved with organizations such as Pro Bono Students Canada, Downtown Legal Services, and the Legal Department of the National Council of Canadian Muslims. After graduating from law school, Sister Maryam will be articling at Simpson Weigel Law, a full-service law firm in the city of Hamilton, where she currently resides. So, Sister Maryam, assalamu alaikum. Thank you for being here with us tonight. And our next representative will be Brother Nabil Hasnain, who is representing engineering. He is a graduate from Ajax High School and is currently a third-year student pursuing a Bachelor of Engineering, majoring in nuclear engineering at Ontario Tech University. His future plans include working in the nuclear energy industry for a few years, and eventually working towards teaching and academia. So, Brother Nabil, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for also being with us here tonight.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. And I'd like to give the stage to Sister Maryam, so she can start us off by providing any further introduction, as well as starting off with the presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. Before I do get into my presentation, if I could just take a few seconds to request from the audience, whether currently live streaming or whether you'll be watching this as a recording in the future, to recite a Surah Fatiha for a grandfather I lost quite recently. I would very much be grateful. So thank you. Having said that, let's just jump right into this presentation.
Sure.
All right, so I've been asked to talk to you about law. So as most know, law school is a professional school. Unlike most professional schools, it's actually a second entry program, meaning you can't directly enter a law school from high school, at least not in Canada. So before you can even apply to law school, you have to first complete at least some years of an undergraduate university education. Now, having said that, I understand I'm speaking predominantly to a high school audience tonight. So while I think it might be too early for most, to think about law school itself, I still think it's beneficial for you to get some flavor of the field and generally what you would need to apply should you choose to do so in the future. So next slide, please. Awesome. So, this intro has been graciously covered by our MC, but just briefly as a recap, I'm currently in my third year at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, and prior to law, I received my Bachelor of Science honors degree in psychology from York University. Next slide. So on the agenda today, we have first, what can you do with a legal education? Then I'm going to briefly look at Canadian law schools, then look at requirements for admission, and along the way, I'm going to provide you with tips and tricks for each requirement based on my own experience. So let's get started with that. Next slide, please. So most people, when they think of law and lawyers, their mind probably takes them to, your typical Hollywood court scene where you're a criminal defense lawyer at a criminal trial, hectoring a witness in cross-examination, yelling something out like, I want the truth, something like that. Well, in fact, only 2% of criminal cases and civil suits make it to the court. So most lawyers are actually not involved with litigation most of the time. And yet, this continues kind of to be the conception of lawyers and what they do. Now, law itself as a field is very diverse, pretty much because you need a lawyer for almost everything, or at least lawyers will convince you that you do. And so we have, entertainment lawyers, corporate lawyers, criminal lawyers, environmental lawyers, immigration lawyers, health lawyers, intellectual property lawyers, and the list goes on. But many people with law degrees actually don't in fact practice law and use their legal education to actually achieve either great things or acquire prominent positions in society. And personally, I think that's attributable to a set of highly transferable skills that you develop in law school, such as analytical reasoning skills, critical thinking skills, and conflict resolution skills. So here on this slide, I've provided hopefully a few familiar faces. We have a few revolutionaries like Mossadegh, Nelson Mandela, Gandhi. We have world leaders such as Obama. More close to home, we have former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, who implemented the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And these figures have actually also studied law. And, a disclaimer, I'm not referring to any of these people necessarily as role models, just, simply predominant figures who happen to have a legal education and law degrees. I've also actually included a picture of David Shore. That's the individual right corner in the orange shirt. And David Shore is actually a writer and producer of a critically acclaimed series, House. And like myself, David Shore actually attended U of T Law. And I was actually privileged to hear a talk of his a few months back where he talked about how his legal education helped him with his writing. So what I'm suggesting to you here is that the options are endless, and that, largely that's attributable to the skills law school equips you with. So next slide. So in Canada, we have 18 common law schools, which I've listed for you here. Now, I myself am a U of T student. However, my experiences, I believe, aren't just limited to U of T. And the reason I believe this and that I feel fairly well positioned to talk to you about admission process is because I've actually applied fairly broadly myself. So the schools that I've bold in for you in white are actually the schools I personally apply to. And I'm happy to say that I was also extended and offered admission from all these schools as well. So I think the tips I will provide you are generalizable to most schools and not just limited to U of T, which is my law school. So next slide, please. What do you need to apply to law? First and foremost, you need at least 3 years of an undergraduate degree. Having said that, having actually a full degree makes you more competitive for law. You also need to have written the law school admissions test, or the LSAT. Most schools require a personal statement. Some require optional essays, and I said require because really it's not optional. And some schools require letters of reference. For the rest of the presentation, I'm just going to go over each requirement in a bit more depth and provide you with tips and tricks based again on what worked for me. So next slide, please. So any university degree is good preparation for law school. There are people at U of T Law who have degrees in engineering, biochemistry, English literature, economics, music, and the list goes on. So I know the next speaker is going to talk to you about engineering, and to those of you here who are eagerly waiting to listen to that, you should know that engineering students actually fare very well in intellectual property / patent law compared to students from traditional backgrounds. So if you're considering a degree in engineering, I recommend like keeping your grades up and consequently leaving your options open for law. And so really what it comes down to then, if there's no prerequisite courses, is all that really matters is your grades, right? So your focus really should be maintaining a high GPA. And I guess the question then is, how do you optimize your grades? And what I want to suggest to you is that I think you should be selecting courses based on instructors teaching the course and their method of evaluation, and not based on convenience. So again, I mean, I think I'm talking predominantly to a high school audience. In university, it becomes very easy to kind of, you know, want to not take Friday courses and, you know, have long weekends every week. But I really don't think that should be your number one priority. What I recommend is, you know, basing your courses, again, on instructor and their method of evaluation. And how can you find out about that? I recommend you look at first archived course syllabi. So I know Psychology at York had a page dedicated to, you know, past courses taught by professors. So that's a really good place to start. Rate My Prof is a really good resource, and so is, you know, other Facebook groups where your peers share personal opinions about courses they've taken. So, you know, these are, I think, a few resources that are available to you that can help you make decisions and find courses that are best matched with your skill sets. So next slide. All right, so next up we have the LSAT. So the LSAT, it's not a test that you know, tests any factual information on law, so you don't have to be familiar with the law of the land to succeed on the LSAT. What you need to be familiar with is logical reasoning, analytical reasoning, reading comp, and there's also an experimental section on the actual LSAT that's just for purposes of standardizing future tests. And there's also an essay section. Now, I think it's a bit too early to, you know, be concerned too much with the LSAT if you're a high school student. However, one, you know, tip I do have is for the reading comp section, because reading comp is actually one of the most hardest sections to improve on. And I think it would be worthwhile for you to start, you know, working on that. And you know, whether if you want to write the LSAT or not, I think it's a valuable skill to acquire. And basically what that section tests is your ability to understand main points of a very dense passage without being necessarily familiar with that subject matter. So what I would recommend is start reading dense materials like passages or articles from The Economist. You can start reading academic articles that are not actually within your area of study. So if you're like a natural science major, you can start reading economic articles, or you know, vice versa. For the rest of the sections, what I have here, LSAT prep course, I think it's not really relevant to you if you're at the high school level for now. So I think that would be my main tip for you at this point. Next slide. So next up, we have personal statement. So unlike medical school, law schools actually do not host interviews. So one of the ways they gauge whether or not you are a compelling candidate is through your personal statement. And again, I think, you know, it's a bit too early to maybe think about what you want to include and how you want to think about your personal statement. But I think the most important tip I can provide you as high school students is that universities have a lot of resources that are available to you for free, but not really because you're actually paying for them with your tuition money, but most people don't take advantage of. And one of those resources is actually your career services. And this is one that I personally took advantage of a lot when I was writing my personal statement. So, you know, just to let you know, I think at York, there was a policy where you could only make a maximum of 2 appointments per week with an advisor. And I think I kept showing up 2 days a week, every week for a good like 10 weeks, to the point where the advisor was just like, you know, take my email. I know there's this policy, but just please don't come back. Like, I don't want to see your face. So just don't come back, right? And I really recommend that you, maybe not be as annoying as I was, but really do make use of these resources, and treat the personal statement as, something that just don't take it lightly. It's a piece of writing that demonstrates to the law school your maturity, your writing style, and it's something that most schools do put a significant amount of weight on. So I think that would be, so that's that. Next slide. So letters of reference. Now, not all schools require letters of reference, like U of T does not, but for the schools that do, most require at least one be a academic reference. Your referees should be able to speak concerning your character, personal qualities, academic capabilities, your performance in employment, volunteer capacity. So I can talk to you about like my own personal referee, like one of them. So in first year, I had taken a course with a prof. I got an A+ in that course. So, she could talk about my academic capabilities in that capacity, but, that already is something that's quite evident from my transcript. So after that, the summer I volunteered in her lab as an RA. So she could talk, about my performance in a volunteering capacity. I think a year after that, I was actually promoted to be lab manager in that lab. So and that was for pay, so she could talk about, my performance in employment capacity. And then after that, I actually completed my honors thesis with her. So she could talk about my writing and research capabilities. And over the course of the number of years I worked with her, she also grew to know me as, at a personal level. So she could also speak to my personal qualities as well. So the tip that I have for anybody, considering law or anything really that requires a letter of reference, is to plan early to establish close longitudinal relationships with your profs, be it through an RA position like myself, or writing an academic paper with a prof or anything like that. So yeah, that's that. And next slide. All right, so I think that's it. Other resources, just, if you have any questions, I would just, recommend that you skim through law school websites. Best thing I can, if you have any specific questions, I think calling and emailing your school of choice with your specific questions is the most safe option. And there's also lawstudents.ca. It's basically this forum for law students and the lawyers as well. And I think you might also find that of use as well. So yeah, thank you very much. And that's the end of my presentation.
All right, thank you so much, Sister Miriam. I'm sure we all benefited a lot from that. I just had a few questions to ask you. So you mentioned how law school consists of people from like all sorts of majors, right? Like you even mentioned engineering, and that basically means that like there's like people from like different backgrounds, different personality traits, right? And like everyone's like has their own reason to pursue law school. So like, what were a few factors that made you personally choose law?
Yeah, for sure. I guess first I would describe myself, as an intellectually curious person. I like learning and solving problems, and I think law kind of provided that opportunity for me to always challenge myself and always keep learning and be creative and solve problems as kind of efficiently as possible. So that was definitely one factor. I think also the fact that my background in psychology also, I think, prepared me well for law by virtue of having, or giving me insight into underlying cognitive processes of human behavior, which I think are instrumental in law. And lastly, I think just the fact that I didn't really see much people in the profession that looked like me. So that was also a motivating factor for me. So I think a combination of those three really is what motivated me to pursue law.
Awesome. Okay. In terms of preparing for law school, so you gave us a few tips, such as reading like condensed material, such as newspapers and so on. So let's say a person does not have an interest initially in these type of things. So is that like an interest that you build over time, or is that something that you're just like naturally like proficient at?
Sorry, interest in reading text materials?
Yeah. Like reading and just like having like an interest for like these type of things.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are considering a professional in law, like I do think it kind of it would be very hard if you do not have an interest in reading. There's a lot of reading involved, a lot of dense materials.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's the type of materials they're reading, but I think it's something that potentially can be, you know, the more you do read, the more you may feel comfortable with it, and the more you'll grow to like it. But I do think, you know, liking to read and enjoying that is very helpful.
Okay, thank you. And just the last question. So for your undergrad, you mentioned how you did a bachelor's in psychology from York University. So does it matter what school you go to for undergrad? Like in terms of like the school's ranking and so on?
Yeah, I mean, based on, I guess, my own personal experience, no. Because, you know, as like York, I don't think by any means is a top tier school. And as I just said, you know, regardless of that, I still received admissions from like 10 different law schools. So I don't, like, all law universities in Canada are really accredited, and I don't really think that should be a, you know, huge concern. But, you know, if you ask me if I think law schools regard like a 4.0 from a person with a degree in nuclear physics from Harvard more highly than somebody with a 4.0 with a psychology degree at York, such as myself, probably. But, you know, do I then recommend that you pursue a nuclear physics degree in Harvard just for that? It depends. It depends on how confident you feel you will do so. I think, you know, they do take into account like the different programs and, you know, how easy it was to maybe to achieve the grade that you did. But I think, you know, again, all schools are kind of accredited and all, it's more or less on the same level.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much for sharing. I think we can move on to the next speaker. So next we're going to be having Brother Habil present to us his presentation about engineering and just a few tips that he can provide to us that we can take advantage of. So Brother Habil, you can start us off.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. Welcome to the second part of this wonderful seminar. First of all, thank you, everyone. Thank you, the Mahdi Youth team, and everyone else who participated. I think this is a great initiative and something that I definitely wish I had when I was, you know, going into school. So yeah, let's get right to it. Let's start with the PowerPoint.
All right.
And at times, you'll find I overlap with what has already been said, either today or yesterday. And at times, I'll even reference what some other participants or speakers have said. So bear with me. Yes, okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm in my third year. Again, Ashar already went over it, but we'll go over it again briefly. I'm in my third year of nuclear engineering, and I'm working towards, you know, getting my bachelor's of engineering, a BEng. I'm at the University of Ontario, which is a pretty new school in terms in relation or relative to the other schools that are in, you know, Canada or in Ontario specifically. Which is why later on I'll talk about the rankings, and you'll find that the University of Ontario is not currently ranked, right? And that's due to a number of factors, but also partially because it is a relatively new school. And so with regard to work experience, I was on an internship at the Canadian Space Agency last fall, so from September to December. And yeah, so next slide. So today we will be discussing the following points. I tried to make it as you know, as simple as possible because I didn't know. This is a pretty serious topic, I understand, but I wanted to make it as you know, informal as possible, which is why I included 2 memes. And I was only allowed 2 memes, so that's why I only put 2 memes. But so yeah, we, like, as engineering students, the general the perception is, and this is actually, I think, generally true, because of our heavy course load, we don't really get any time off for anything else. So yeah, you'll find a lot of them, you know, stressed, possibly losing their hair, as I am, and other you know, things that come up with lack of stress management. But anyways, I don't want to scare anyone, but this is again, this is another benefit actually of engineering, because it is a degree that after 4 years you're going right into the workforce, right? Versus other degrees, for example, where you might have to go to a second level. You know, you might have to take on a second degree or go to a professional school to get some sort of a footing into the market, the job market. All right, next slide. So what is engineering, right? I sort of, the way I structured this PowerPoint was basically, I thought to myself, like, what would I, you know, if I went back, what would I want to know? And I thought, you know, the first thing you would want to know is, what exactly am I getting into, right? Like engineering, I mean, we've probably all heard it as Desis. I'm sure there's a lot of Desis watching, but other ethnicities as well. First generation immigrants were told, you know, you're either a doctor, lawyer, or engineer. So those are like top 3 professions, right? But like, what does it actually mean, right? So generally, you can think of it like this. Anything that you see, you know, in the world around you, in terms of material objects, is pretty much has been designed and constructed by an engineer, right? So that's that's generally the idea. So engineers, what they do is they figure out how things work and how to make them work better, right? Like how to increase the efficiency of things, how to optimize things, how to make things go faster, how to heat up things faster, and that's generally the sorry, you could say the discipline that we're or the ideas we're working with. So you know, we're designing, we're manufacturing, we're problem solving, a lot of problem solving, you know, and it's basically a applied science. You could think of it like that. So the different disciplines that exist under the branch of engineering are mechanical engineering, right? You have electrical, you have your chemical, nuclear, such as myself, and civil, software, and aerospace. With regard to, you know, the difficulty of each particular degree, the general consensus is electrical and chemical pretty much tie for first. And then you have, you know, aerospace and nuclear, which you could say second or third. And then mechanical, because it is a very broad and general engineering discipline, it tends to be on the lower side of difficulty. And then, you know, you have your software and civil. So I wouldn't want to put them under. I don't know what they would go in terms of ranking, but I'm sure they have their own difficulties. Yeah, so that's sort of that. So mechanical engineering is basically, again, it's a very broad. It's very broad. It's very general. And with mechanical, you can pretty much go into any engineering, you know, position or job, because it deals with everything so broadly. And then you have the more specific engineerings, right, which is your electrical and chemical. For example, with electrical, you're dealing a lot, obviously, with circuits, you know, with the flow of electrons, voltage, current, all these things, right? With chemical, you know, you're working more with, obviously, chemistry. You'll find a lot of chemical engineers end up in manufacturing and production of, let's say, skin products, hair products, you know, these types of things. Or even they could even end up in the petroleum side of things, where they're working with, you know, gasoline, natural gas, and things like that. And then aerospace, obviously, you're working with things that fly. Civil engineering, you're working with, you know, buildings and structures. Software, obviously, computers. And nuclear, you're working with pretty much nuclear energy, power plants. You could also go into the nuclear physics side of things, where you're working with radionuclides, nuclear physics, and such. Next slide, please. So a breakdown of nuclear engineering. I'm going to be going more into this than the other ones, because I am obviously most familiar with this one. So generally, the school that I go to, UOIT, that's the short name for it. It preps its students for pretty much joining the nuclear energy industry, right? And they sort of they don't they don't really say this explicitly, but it's kind of understood, right? Based on the courses you're taking, the professors you have, who have all pretty much been in the nuclear industry, the energy industry themselves, and that's sort of the direction they want their students to go into, which is why they have a really strong connection with the nuclear power plants that are in Ontario, such as the Pickering nuclear power plant, Darlington, and Bruce Power up in the north. So it's generally, you're looking at about 4 to 5 years, right? So for nuclear engineering in particular, it's different from the other disciplines in the sense that we're taking 6 courses a semester, every semester for 4 years, right? And most people, like myself, we can't handle 6 courses a semester, just because of the sheer amount of work you have to do, right? And the content that you have to absorb, because you're talking about core courses. We're not really taking that many electives. I think first year you have 1 elective, second year none, third you have 1 or 2, and fourth you have 1 or 2. So that's why most people they spread it out a bit. Instead of taking 6, you'll take 5 or 4 a semester. Take some in the summer, for example, and spread it out to reduce the course load. Make sure that you can handle it, because obviously you want to be able to get an adequate GPA, right? And I know the perception or the understanding in our discipline is that C's get degrees, but as Mariam mentioned earlier, you want to aim for the higher GPAs, just in case you want to do anything in the future, and obviously to make sure that you're understanding what you're actually doing. So and yeah, also the time length of your study is generally extended also, because you will probably be taking time off for a co-op or an internship. If you don't get one in the summer, because generally summer internships are highly sought after. They are very much in demand, but obviously the supply is not really there, and you may or may not get it. So you might be taking a fall or winter semester off to get that co-op or internship experience. So and that's perfectly fine. You'll find that when you talk to people, you'll find that those who did take the time off for that work experience fared much better after they graduated in terms of finding a job, right, in the job market, because engineering is a saturated market at the moment in Canada. That's not to say that jobs aren't available, but that any sort of experience, any sort of edge you can get over the competition will definitely help. So what are we learning here, right? So because it is prepping UIT specifically, and also another point to mention is that UIT is currently the only university in Ontario, at least, that offers a bachelor's in nuclear engineering. You do have McMaster and Waterloo, I believe, that both offer masters and PhDs in nuclear engineering, but not a bachelor's. And I think a University of New Brunswick as well offers a bachelor's, but that's there as well. So obviously learning is centered around topics related to the nuclear fuel cycle. So everything to do with from everything from mining of the uranium ore, or the fuel pellets that are going to go into the reactor itself. We're talking about nuclear physics. We're talking about understanding how instruments work. So we also, we do coding, a bit of coding. We do a little bit of electrical circuits. So it is, we do kind of dabble into the other disciplines of engineering, but obviously the main focus is how can we get this, how can we get energy out of this uranium pellet, right? So we also talk about heat generation transport. The main core courses you could think of are thermodynamics and heat transfer. And then we also obviously talk about energy production, right? So the main idea here is like the general idea of a nuclear power plant is essentially we're taking uranium, we're letting the nuclear reaction occur, right, by whatever process it does, and that's a separate discussion. It heats up water, water boils, steam is produced, steam goes through pipes, pushes a turbine, we're spinning the turbine, AC, DC, and you're getting power. That's basically how it works. So that's the general idea. So another thing with the UIT is that you can actually also pick up a minor in health physics, just because of how closely related our programs are. And with that, you could probably also, head towards the medical direction if you want to, because with nuclear, with a background in nuclear engineering or just nuclear science in general, You can also work with the production of medical radionuclides, right, which are necessary, for example, for chemotherapy or sterilizing of equipment, medical equipment and such. So with regard to job prospects, so far it's pretty strong in Ontario. There is a projected shortage because a lot of current nuclear engineers will be retiring soon, and there's a lot of work currently going on, right, with the refurbishment of the Pickering power plant, I think refurbishment or expansion of the Darlington, and there's a lot of innovation happening as well with that. Canada actually recently signed a contract for development of small modular reactors, SMRs, and there's a lot of work going on with regard to that. Next slide, please. So the course material. So now you're wondering, okay, so we know what engineering is. We know what generally we're looking at in terms of years, and what we'll be generally studying. So the course material is for first and second years is very similar for all the disciplines generally speaking. So for example, we're taking classes like engineering, graphics, and design, which is basically you're working with either AutoCAD or for NX for us, and you're designing and modeling objects. You obviously have your math, you have your calculus 1 and 2, you have linear algebra, you have statistics, you have numerical methods, and so on. As I think Gazim mentioned yesterday, this is also because we're talking about STEM. This is a math heavy discipline. So we're also talking about fluid mechanics, the movement of fluids and how that changes in different scenarios, thermodynamics. We're talking about electric circuits, problem solving, and specifically with regard to nuclear, we're looking more on the nuclear physics side of things, right? Like radiation and nuclear technologies. We're looking at nuclear reactor kinetics, how subatomic particles interact with each other, and radiation protection, how we can protect ourselves, and the public at large from, nuclear reactions, basically. Next slide, please. So these are just a short list of universities that you can look at with regard to engineering in general. And as I mentioned before, University of Ontario being the only one that's offering a bachelor's in nuclear engineering. But you have, University of Toronto, which is actually ranked first, I believe, by Maclean's. And University of Waterloo also ranks first by Maclean's. You have University of British Columbia, which actually they have the largest cyclotron in the world, which is really cool. Like if you want to look at nuclear research down the line, or maybe even doing your 4th year thesis, that would be a really cool thing. So UBC is ranked 3rd on Maclean's list. McMaster, it's ranked 6th, but McMaster, they have a very short, a smaller sized nuclear reactor. Actually, they have a facility for that, and they do a lot of experimentation and research with that. It's ranked 6th on Maclean's, but I mean that's a really cool feature. Like if I knew about that before, I know about it's a master's program, so perhaps that's something I could consider in the future. And University of Ontario, again, because of various factors, it was actually ranked 20th in 2016, and it's currently not ranked on Maclean's. But again, it's the only university that's currently offering a bachelor's in nuclear engineering. But the rest of these universities offer, degrees in the other disciplines. So you have your mechanical, electrical, chemical, aerospace, and so on. Next slide, please. So the costs per year. So when I started UIT for nuclear engineering, it was about 11 grand, almost a bit more than 11 grand a year. So for 2 semesters, so it was about 5 and 6 for each. And but for the other disciplines, it was like 9 or 10 or something like that. But now it's apparently 9,300 a year. And U of T and Waterloo looking at more expensive programs. Yeah, so keep that in mind, when you're thinking of where to apply to, obviously. I don't know if that should be your primary concern, because obviously what you want to look at is the quality of education you're getting, the kind of professors you'll be in touch with, you know, the student life perhaps, or other things that may enhance your university experience. Like Waterloo, for example, I can speak of. They have a really great, you know, co-op or internship program, I think. And what they do is, and this is all from people I've talked to, but they help a lot. They help their students a lot with, you know, finding co-ops and internships, and they start this from the first year, which is something really different from how UIT operates, where we don't really have that support, or it's not pushed as much on us. It's more like, okay, if you want to, you can, because it's optional, but it's not really like pushed, you know, for all students. It's more like some students find out and, you know, get the edge over others, and then, you know, some of us in second or third year, we realize that this is something we should be doing as well. So you can definitely, for the other universities, you can look at their respective websites and figure out more about that. And yeah, next slide, please. So for the co-op and internship program for UIT, you need at least a 2.3 GPA to be eligible, which I believe is a C, if I'm not mistaken. And that shouldn't be too hard to maintain, to be honest. So essentially what this will help you do is, it will help you, first of all, by enhancing what you're already learning, you know, in the sense that now all this theory that you've learned, now you're actually applying it, right? Or getting some sort of exposure, at least if you're not directly working in applying it. Maybe you're working on the more like, you know, intern side of things, but at least you'll get exposure. You'll have the ability to talk to professionals. You'll have the, you know, yeah, and you'll have a bit of time off school as well, which can be helpful. And what this can do is actually, apart from all of that, these are all benefits, but it can work towards your, you can allocate this time towards your professional engineering experience. So after you graduate, after you get your bachelor's in engineering, you can work towards getting your PEng, right? Which is what most engineers work towards. And basically, if you do this co-op or internship during your studies, you can allocate this time. So let's say you do it for 4 months, 8 months, however long, or you do multiple internships and it ends up coming up to, let's say, a year even, right? You can allocate all of this time towards your professional engineering experience. And I believe you need, I think, 2 years of experience before you can apply. So, I mean, if you already have 1 year down and, you know, you graduate, you do another year of engineering work, then there you go. Like a year after you graduate, you can already apply for your PEng license, essentially, right? Where now you can begin to work as like you can now truly call yourself an engineer, actually, and you can now sign off on projects. You know, you have a lot more to play with, to work with, and you'll definitely be respected more, you know, amongst your peers. So the UIT Co-op Internship Office, the fees are about, I think, $650 a term. So each semester you're paying $650, I think. But also the alternative is that you don't necessarily have to go through them, because it is an optional, you can opt into it if you want. But a lot of my friends, for example, they, you know, took their own route and they sort of applied for jobs outside of the co-op internship office, you know, and they didn't have to pay that fee. So what the office essentially does is they help you, you know, with regard to guidance, with regard to, you know, resume building. You have your cover letters, you have, you know, building your LinkedIn profile, for example, and getting in touch with different companies. They'll have, you know, particular individuals in those companies that can, you know, forward your resume to the right people, or and things like that, basically. So, you know, they're really helpful. But if you have your own, you know, if you've sort of understood how the system works, you don't necessarily have to go down that route. And with regard to what sort of jobs you're looking at least with, so these are generally the companies that people apply for, at least from UIT. OPG is the first that people go for, and this is regardless of what discipline you're generally in. So you have your mechanical engineers applying, your nuclear engineers, even your electrical engineers, software engineers. I'm not sure about those guys, but So you have your OPG, you have Bruce Power, which is another nuclear power plant. You have CNL, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. They are the foremost leading, you could say, organization in terms of nuclear research in Canada. And they're based in Chalk River, just north of Ottawa. You have SNC Lavalin, which is a mechanical engineering. Generally, AECOM, you know, Stantec, Pratt and Whitney, based in Montreal, Longueuil, and you know, other companies like that. So this is generally what people apply to. Obviously, there's a lot more that I'm not naming, but these are, like, you know, you could say that the top companies that, or the top names that come to mind. So I can talk a bit about my own experience. So at Canadian Space Agency, so one thing that I can mention that differentiates me from others is I didn't really apply to any jobs at all. I was, you know, just focused on studying, and I had developed a really good relationship with one of my professors. And so, you know, second year ended, and I was having a conversation with him. It was the end of summer before September, and I was, you know, asking him if there's any positions available, you know, just out of curiosity. And he you know, being active in the nuclear field for a very, very long time and having a lot of connections, immediately was like, okay, there's a couple of jobs here. There's one that I would recommend to you. And he was good friends with actually my manager, and they worked on this one project that I worked on. For they've been working on it for more than a decade, for a very long time. And essentially, I got that job through him, basically, right? I didn't apply for it myself. It was basically through a connection. So what I mean to say is that building, you know, you might think that the time you're spending outside of class building these connections is not that beneficial, but I would tell you, I would ask you to reconsider, because I mean, the examples are in front of you, right? For myself, I have other friends of mine who applied for like 20, 30 jobs and they're not getting anything back, right? And then I have that one professor that I built a relationship with. I haven't applied to anything, and that one connection got me in, right? So yeah, I mean, broaden your horizons, you know, think big, and work towards what you want to work towards. And yeah, there's nothing stopping you. Next slide, please. So a few tips and tricks that I can offer are the following, and these are things that I've sort of understood through time, and, you know, through also the advice of others, my elders. So the first things first is studying, right? You really need to understand, and I know you guys are just maybe grade 11, 12 in high school. So really understand your learning style. You know, how do you learn? Are you an auditory person? Are you a visual person? Do you like to write things out? Do you like to speak to people? Do you like to teach? Like, how do you absorb information? This is going to save you a lot of time and stress, right? And obviously, you can do your own research, you know, try to figure out, or if you've already understood, that's great. But, you know, you can also ask others, other students in university, perhaps, or even your own peers, how they learn, and, you know, perhaps acquire other styles, other learning, you know, whatever works for you, essentially, is what you should focus on. And don't worry about what other people are generally doing, because at the end of the day, you have to write that exam yourself, right? You have to do the tests and quizzes and assignments generally yourself. So that will really help a lot. And definitely take advantage again of the resources at your disposal. And remember that, especially, I think STEM in general, but engineering for sure, you cannot go it alone. This is not something that you can go on an individual basis. This is a very teamwork minded, group work minded venture. So keep that in mind as you're taking this path. And with regard to time management, again, I don't think anyone can emphasize this enough. Make sure you're allocating time properly to what, you know, with justice, of course, where time should be allocated appropriately, and that will, you know, keep your head clear. And again, with regard to networking, as I mentioned earlier, when I was speaking about my internship experience, developing your interpersonal skills, right? This is how you're gonna be able to do this. by speaking to, you know, your peers, by speaking to professors, by speaking to other professionals. Go to the networking events that are hosted by the clubs or the societies at your school, and you know, put yourself out there. It might be uncomfortable, but that's the only way we really grow, right? And keep in mind, engineers are generally understood to be poor in this respect. People say that, or the general idea is engineers are very bad at communicating, right? We don't know how to speak properly, or you know, eloquently, or write properly. We just do the equations and solve problems. So this might be something that you might want to you know, keep working on, of course. And the other obviously benefit of networking is opportunities will open themselves up to you, right? By putting yourself out there, by letting your face be known, your name be known, and what you're good at. Even like, let's say you're doing any side hobbies or side projects that you're working on that are related to your field, or even not related maybe, and they are your personal interests. By, you know, showing yourself as you are, you know, as the individual, the unique person that you are, will automatically develop this sort of interest. People will have this interest in you because you're not just now this, you're not just this monolith anymore. You're not just, you know, this person with this degree. You're this person with all these other parts to you, and being a well-rounded person is definitely is a great thing. Yeah, so that's it. That's all. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, brother Nabil. You scared us quite a bit at the beginning there with all the facts about hair loss and, you know, not getting enough sleep and so on. But you gave us enough tips and strategies, so I think we can all benefit from those and actually perform much better. Just a question. You mentioned how engineers have poor interpersonal skills, right? Why do you think that's a factor, and how can future students avoid that situation?
So engineers generally, we don't really. I don't want to say we, because I don't want to put myself in this category, to be honest. But generally, engineers don't read. They don't read. Like, most of them are just solving equations. You know, like you'll even notice, like in assignments, when your friends are doing assignments, or like the engineers that the guys that I'm working with, they won't read the questions properly, right? Like they have very poor comprehension, analytical skills. Like problem solving is there, and that's great, but if you're not able to communicate to others and understand what other people are saying to you, then what you know is essentially, I mean, it's useless, to be honest.
All right, so you're telling us that future engineering students should start reading more and actually be able to comprehend and just like start speaking with people more and be more interactive, right?
Definitely, yeah.
Okay. Next question. Can you tell us the difference between an engineering degree in university versus pursuing an engineering technician diploma in college? Like, what are the differences? Does it affect your job? Does it affect how much you get in terms of course load and so on?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So actually, I was in not in my internship, but while I was doing my degree, or while I am doing my degree, yeah, I spoke to a couple of people who actually, after it was before their degree, they had done a technical sort of diploma in college, right?
Yeah.
And they got into the workforce right away, and it was a really hands-on thing, right? Very practical. And for them, they didn't really face any challenges with regard to getting a job in the first place, where you'll find a lot of engineers after their degree, they might be working like, you know, minimum wage jobs because they can't find a job. You know, it is a very saturated market. So there's definitely a lot of benefit in that. And honestly, it depends on what you're aiming for, you know, in terms of career development, pay, you know, salary and things like that. So for example, the people that were in my classes, after their diploma, they did get a job, but the salary wasn't really what they were looking for. So, and obviously for career advancement, you need further education, right? So they came into, you know, getting an engineering degree so that, you know, they have both the college practical experience as well as the theoretical. And that, I mean, I don't know where they are now, but I'm sure that would help them later on in terms of negotiating a salary or, you know, advancing in whatever role they were in that company.
Awesome. Okay. And this will be the last question before we move on to the interactive discussion and answer session. So I'd advise the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to add them in the YouTube live chat so I can ask the speakers the questions on behalf of you. So Brother Nabil, the last question for you. Do different engineering majors focus on similar courses for the first few years? And like, when is it that you start to specialize in a certain thing? For example, you mentioned how there's like different majors such as mechanical, industrial, civil, and so on. So like, when do you actually start specializing into these?
So you could say the first year is pretty much exactly the same for all engineers, except for nuclear. Like we have one course that because again, we have 6 courses a semester, right? Mm-hmm. So we have that one course in radiation and nuclear technology that other disciplines don't have. Second year, it's still very similar. You'll have maybe 2 or 3 courses that are now specific to each discipline. And then by third year is pretty much, everyone is sort of now separated. Even like I'm taking I took thermodynamics, right? Mm-hmm. And my mechanical engineer friend also took thermodynamics, but my thermodynamics is more geared towards nuclear power plants, whereas his thermodynamics was more geared towards automotives and other machines like that. So yeah, third and fourth year is pretty much. Third year we're changing, we're streamlining now into exactly where we want to end up, and fourth year is pretty different.
All right, makes sense. Thank you so much. Now I'd invite both the speakers to be on screen. So now we can start asking questions on behalf of the audience. So again, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the YouTube live chat option, and I can ask those questions on your behalf. I'd like to start off by asking my own question, and this is, what does a typical day in the life in your major incorporate, such as your course load, how your work-life balance goes on, and just ways how you study best, and so on. So I'd like Sister Mariam to answer this first, please.
Yeah, sure. So typical day, I mean, now that because of COVID, much less commuting, but I guess really just lectures. Like I have, I guess, 4 courses right now. So each of them, I would say, so there's readings for each of them. So I have, honestly, most of my days, I would say, is reading case material, 4 courses, usually takes, I would say, until like 7-8 p.m. and after that, usually free.
Okay, so would you say your law school studies are a bit harder than your undergraduate studies, or are they like at a similar level, you'd say?
They're different. I think with psychology, it was a bit more memorization, much less reading. With law, there's much more readings and much less memorization. I mean, there's some memorization elements, but personally, before I went into law, it was black box for me, and I thought, you get textbooks just like undergrad, and you learn laws, but actually you're reading cases. And so it's much different in that regard.
Okay, thank you. And Brother Nabil, if you would also like to tell us what a typical day in your life incorporates.
So a typical day currently, COVID is honestly a blessing. The commuting is terrible. My classes generally start around 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. is like the max that we're going to for third year at least. And I have Tuesdays pretty much off, Fridays pretty much off. But Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, I have classes 9 to 5, right? So I have my lectures, tutorials. I have 3 classes with laboratories. So essentially every week every day I'm doing something or the other. So mainly, it's a lot of most of my time consists of not even lectures. It's mostly working on assignments and getting my labs done and projects. Yeah.
Okay, so like in terms of your number of years in engineering, would you say like it gets to be like more work as you go higher, like in years, like in terms of course load?
Yeah. So first is pretty manageable because you're just it's pretty much a refresher of high school. Second, it gets a bit tougher because it is a little bit more new material. But third year is pretty much like you're taking first and second, combining them, and now you have to now synthesize the information and apply it to everything, right? Okay. So third year is definitely the toughest because again, yeah, it's a lot of, it's very content, I mean, core course heavy, right? And then fourth year is generally understood to be a smoother year because now we're just, you know, tying up the loose ends. We're kind of, now we've understood, like, you know, the fundamentals of everything and put everything together. And now we're just sort of going through, you know, what's the best way to go about doing things, you know, efficiency, optimization. We do ethics as well. And then it's your thesis project.
Okay, awesome. All right, I move on to the next question. So, what are ways that you personally use to stay on top of your studies? Do you guys use things such as Google Calendar? Do you guys use methods such as goal setting short-term goals for your courses in terms of getting a certain mark? So, if you can just like highlight a few things that you use. So, I'd ask Sister Mariam to start us off.
Sure. I think I personally have like a weekly calendar of, you know, a weekly to-do list of everything that I want to achieve in that week. So I have like my readings on there. I have, you know, like my time kind of spaced out and like when I want to take breaks and all that. So I try to do that on a weekly basis, as well as like just have like a calendar, because it's easy when you do that to like kind of lose sight of like the greater picture. So also have like just a overall calendar of like all like the entire semester, so you know where you stand. Yeah, I think that's the thing that comes to my mind.
Cool. And Brother Nabil?
So in my phone, I just I think Google Calendar, right? I just put in when things are due, and I have a calendar on the wall, and I write down, you know, same thing, when things are due. And then on my sticky notes on the computer, I just write down what I should have done, right? So that I'm not doing things last minute.
Awesome. Okay. So moving on to the next question. I actually got a question from the chat. So do students organize study groups or online discussion forums? Sorry. Like, is that a helpful way of studying? If any of you would like to take that question. All right, I choose someone then, Brother Nabil, if you have any experience with that.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, so do students organize study groups or online discussion forums? And if so, how helpful are they?
Okay, so like, study, I mean, you end up sort of forming a group eventually. I think first year, pretty much, you form a group of, like your friends, so to speak, who you've understood to be, you know, they're hard workers, or like they have strengths in certain subjects. And that sort of formed first, second year. You have a good friend group that can, you know, you're going through the same classes together, or you're doing the same classes, and it's definitely really, really helpful. But in this COVID time, like if you're starting out, first, I honestly don't know how anyone is doing it, to be honest. I don't know. I'm sure there's people use like Discord and other social media sites to get together, but it's definitely a lot easier when you can see who you're dealing with, right?
And Sister Mariam, I have a question to you. So what type of studying works best for you? Like, do you work best following like a certain technique of studying, like note taking and then memorizing, or like what thing works best for you?
Yeah, definitely. I do a lot of note taking. I think it helps when, you know, I just read something. For example, if I read it through once, then twice, and then the third time I take down notes. So that, you know, the third time I actually know what points are actually relevant, because, you know, when you first start highlighting, you kind of highlight everything because everything seems important. So yeah, and also I just wanted to talk about the study group thing. I really, for me, it's been very beneficial. It's something that I really recommend. I've used it in undergrad, even in law school, and I think for me personally anyway, actually going over the material and trying to teach somebody else really kind of instills like the material, and it helps you actually learn it as you're teaching somebody else many times. And sometimes, you know, you might not be able to actually ask a question in class, and, you know, you can pose it to a classmate, and through discussions like that, I think you learn a lot. So I just want to answer that question.
Thank you for sharing. The next question would be more to your relationships with your professors and peers. So how important is it to have that relationship between you and the professor? Like Brother Nabil mentioned how he even got like entire co-op opportunity, right? And Sister Mariam, you mentioned how you got to know your prof in your undergraduate years and how that really helped you in terms of finding or getting reference letters, right? So how important is that, and how much emphasis should future students put into that relationship? So if Brother Nabil, if you can start us off with that.
Yeah, it's definitely a pivotal thing, you know, in your education to develop those relationships, because not only does it, you know, sort of break you out of your shell of high school, where you might not have that, you know, close relationship with your teachers, but it really exposes you to, because again, these professors, I mean, they're experts of their fields, right? And they've been in these fields for, we're talking decades, right? If they're teaching that course, then they have a very good grasp of it, and they have a lot of, you know, experience, maybe even in the industry itself before they came into academia. So they have a lot to offer, and you know, taking time out of, let's say, it doesn't even have to be like, it definitely doesn't have to be a daily thing, but maybe out of a week or out of a month, you know, go see this professor once or twice, and it doesn't even have to be for help on any particular thing, but that's also there. But it could also just be for, you know, a conversation, a discussion about something that you might be interested in. And, you know, the research opportunities are also there. Yeah.
Awesome. And Sister Mariam, if you would also like to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, whether you want to continue in, for example, for me, whether I wanted to continue in psychology or, you know, use that prof to give me like a reference letter for another, you know, program, because you know, that this prof told me that, you know, that she would have taken me on as a grad student, for example, had I stayed in psychology. So, you know, that for me was good assurance. If I didn't get into, you know, my program of choice, for example. So it's good for, even if you're not sure if, you know, you want to necessarily pursue the field you are in undergrad, I think it's still valuable to get involved in that field and build those close relationships, because again, it can help you actually move up that field itself, or use them for references as referees for whatever program you choose to pursue after.
Awesome. The next question, how do I identify as a student if I'm able to pursue a certain career? And how do I assess if I have the relevant skills for that certain career or educational pathway? So Brother Nabil, if you can just shed some light on that, please.
So funny story, you know, people say that generally engineers are like those kids who, when they're young, they just take apart things and figure out how they work, right? I was never that kid. I read a lot of books. I was interested. I had natural curiosity, of course, and I think I maintained that in my even high school years. But I was never that kid. So when they would tell that story even in class, I would be like the odd one out, right? Everyone else is like, yeah, you know, I took apart that computer and I was in grade 2. And I'm like, no, I didn't do that. So that, but like, yeah, definitely you may not, I mean, you definitely know yourself better than others. So you probably have a good judge of your aptitude and you know what your strengths are. But it doesn't hurt to, you know, maybe ask your parents, your teachers, your friends, you know, like, what have you seen in me that maybe shines out more than the rest, other qualities perhaps that might help direct you into a certain direction. But at the same time, just because you have a particular set of you know, character traits or qualities does not necessitate that you will be good in that particular field, right? It may be an advantage, but it doesn't necessitate that is exactly what you're going to do with the rest of your life, right?
Thank you.
So final point is it may not even be the case that after your degree you end up in that in that industry. You know, there's a lot of people with degrees in particular fields or disciplines that they end up in a completely different path in life. So, yeah.
Awesome. And Sister Miriam, if you would also like to add anything.
Yeah, sure. So I think, you know, a lot of times we just have kind of like stereotypes of what person in a certain field looks like. And, you know, when I went to law school, I kind of was expecting a certain, you know, I guess the stereotype law student. I'm not the stereotype law student, right? And so I think, you know, don't limit yourself. But again, as Nabil said, I think you know yourself best. One thing that I would recommend is, you know, I'm assuming you guys are, this question is from a student who's still in high school. There's so much time to just go and actually, for example, shadow somebody in a certain profession or work at a certain, I don't know, like if you're interested in law, go like volunteer at like a law firm or work or whatever, you know? So I think exposing yourself to different careers and environments is a good way to assess if you feel comfortable or if you like what you see in that field.
Awesome. And I think I'd make this the last question in terms of studying, and then I'd like to move towards finances and co-op opportunities, unless there's anyone from the chat who has, or from the audience that has any further questions. So is there any tips on how to prep for exams, and what are test banks? Brother Habil, if you would like to start us off.
Good question. So getting ready for exams, honestly, it depends on the class itself. I don't think there's one way to study. I mean, of course, you have your own learning styles, right? But, you know, some classes, for example, will require more of a problem solving of questions, you know, question sets to understand, let's say, certain concepts, right? Or certain classes will require you to actually read up on the theory and understand the concept more than problem solving the questions themselves, right? So yeah, it really depends on the class and the test banks. So it's definitely good to get resources from upper year students, you know, to help you prepare for any sort of examination, midterm test you might have. But don't rely on them entirely, because you know that can be your Achilles heel.
Okay, and Sister Miriam, if you would also like to add on to that.
Sir, can you just repeat the question?
Sure. Is there any tips on how to prep for exams, and what are test banks?
Right. So, you know, the point I was making earlier about, you know, choosing profs based on like different methods of evaluation, I think it depends on, you know, what exam it is. Some profs, you know, have, or some courses are very essay-based heavy. Some are multiple choice. And what I recommend is, you know, in university, at least for most programs, you kind of have that option of choosing between courses or choosing between sections of courses. And a lot of times, what I found was different sections of a course were actually like kind of like taking a prof, like different, the same course with different profs. It kind of felt like it's a completely different course altogether. So, you know, I would first focus on like what kind of exam you feel most comfortable with, right? If you have that option of choosing, I would really recommend that you, for example, if you're very a good essay writer and you always struggle between options A and C on a multiple choice exam, then try to find like a prof who has whose focus is more heavily on essay writing, for example. And then with that, so I guess it kind of depends on the type of exam. So I would say first talk to your profs, see what kind of exams they do have. And one thing that I did do for all my courses is I kind of walked up to my profs and was like, so how do I get an A+ in this course, right? And sometimes they'll say that it's not possible, I'm sorry, like, which for me, like, I would just walk away and say, like, I'm not, you know, because you don't want to put in the effort and not actually reap the benefits. So, you know, what I'm saying is just, I think it's very helpful to actually ask the prof. Don't be afraid of that and see what they think a good grade is and how to study for it.
All right, thank you. We got a question. So how do I approach my prof? Like, are there timings or contact information provided, like at the beginning of the year? System Hurry, if you can take that question.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think definitely. I mean, all courses usually have course outlines. And one thing the profs really hate, I think, is when you ask them a question that's actually available on the course outline. I would assume, their office hours, they usually profs have office hours, and their contacts are listed on that outline. So the first thing I think you should do is refer to that, and if it's not there, then approach them in class and ask them.
Awesome. All right. I'd like to shift the discussion more towards the cost of the programs. So Brother Habil highlighted the cost for his program and comparing this cost to other universities. So Sister Mariam, if you can talk about the cost of your program that you are currently in and how it differs with other universities and how it was completely different or similar to your undergraduate costs.
Yeah, for sure. So law school definitely costs more. U of T law is actually the most high up there. It's actually around 36,000 per year. And I think McGill would be the lowest one, which is around like 9,000, I believe, for non-Quebec residents. So it definitely costs more. But if you want any specific answers, off the top of my head, I don't know what each of the 18 schools cost, but you'll have to refer to the website.
Okay. And in terms of your undergraduate cost, like how are those in comparison with your law school cost?
To be honest, I don't really remember how much undergrad cost.
Okay.
I think it was like 7,000 per year.
Okay. Okay.
So much less.
Much less. Okay. Okay. Cool. And moving on, I'd like to talk about co-op opportunities. So can you tell us about your own experiences within your co-op opportunities and how relevant is it to have a professional profile, a professional online profile? So Brother Habil, if you can start us off with that, please.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll talk about the online profile thing first. Developing a LinkedIn profile is definitely a good idea, just because it's sort of become like a status quo type thing, right? Everyone sort of has it, and it definitely helps a lot if an employer wants to screw you up and that name comes up first, and anything they really need is right there in front of them, and you can sort of customize it to look however you want it to look. But Asher, what was the first part?
The question was, can you tell us about your co-op opportunities and how your overall experience went with them?
Okay.
Yeah.
So for my own personal experience, I honestly didn't get to do much engineering at all. But the main benefits I really took away from my experience was being in the workforce itself for the first time. Having that exposure to a wide range of professionals. Being able to have discussions with them, conversations with them, being in the same same building, and I would meet up frequently with the other co-op and internships from all across Canada, and see how their experience has been and what other opportunities they've had. Like all that in Noble Waterloo, I only know through the guys I met at CSA. So like that yeah. So I would say even if you don't get to do much in terms of applying what you've learned, you will definitely learn a lot regardless.
Okay, and Sister Mariam.
Yeah, so I mean, in law, we don't really have co-op, but what you're kind of expected is to have or work during the summers, and it kind of leads you at the end of your third year to get an articling position. So for myself, first year I actually volunteered first at Downtown Legal Services during my first year of undergrad, which is U of T's legal clinic. And so then during my first summer, I worked there in the employment law division and University Appeals, and also kind of dabbled in housing law. And in my second summer, I worked with the National Canadian Council of Muslims and their legal affairs department. So it's kind of like that. You have to kind of work during the summers. There's no really formal co-op. And as for the online presence, I think it's useful mainly to gauge the kind of employers that are out there. But I think in terms of like yourself finding employment opportunities, I think networking events are much more helpful for that.
Cool, thank you. And we got a question from the chat about finances. So how easy is it to pay off loans after post-secondary? So Brother Habil, if you can start us off with that.
So paying off loans after post-secondary.
Yes, like after your degree, after you finish that, like once you get a job and stuff. Like, is it easy to pay off, or is it like does it take more years? Like.
So I haven't personally started a process yet.
Okay.
So maybe Mariam could answer this better.
Yeah, sure. If Sister Mariam can just no, okay.
No, I'm in debt.
Yeah, no, I feel like all post-secondary students are in a lot of debt, and I think it really, actually, I shouldn't give my personal experience. We're here to learn from you guys. So let's talk about pay scale then, because like that kind of helps with this discussion, right, of how to like pay off loans. So what's the typical pay scale after graduating? Like, for example, Brother Habil, after you graduate from your university, how much can a person expect to be paid, like within 1 year after graduation and like within 5 years after graduation?
So generally, if you're getting into at least the nuclear energy side of things, let's say OPG or Boost Power, you're looking at a salary of around, I think, 60 to 65. And you could move easily up to 70, 75 within 5 years. But obviously, after tax, it's not that much, as I've been told by friends who have graduated recently. So about a month, you're making anywhere I would say around $3,000 or $3,500.
Okay.
And if you're paying off, let's say OSAP, even if I think the minimum payment, if you're making like $750 a month, then you would be paying off a $40,000 loan in like 10 years. So really, it depends on your circumstance, to be honest. Like, do you have support from your parents? Are you living in the same house so you don't have to pay rent? That's a big expense. Food, transportation, all these other things. So it really depends on your circumstance and what your salary is.
Okay, and Sister Mariam, if you could talk about how much a lawyer can expect to be paid within a year after graduation and like within 5 years after graduation.
Yeah, so I mean, again, it depends where you work. So like, for example, articling students in Bay Street, I think, expect 2,250 like per week. And I mean, but like if you're not on Bay Street, I guess, or not pursuing like corporate, it would be lower. But honestly, I'm not too sure about. It really depends, right? So how it works is like you're going to be doing your articling, and hopefully become an associate and then partner. But it's variable and highly dependent on where you work. Okay,
cool. And with that, I'd like to end my questions. I just ask each one of you to give us a final remark or just final words of advice that we can use. Brother Habil, if you would like to start us off, please.
Sure. So one thing that people told me when I was in high school was find your passion, or what you're really passionate about doing. And it's a very nice piece of sentimental advice. But at the same time, I think it's important not to neglect and forget that finances have a big part to play in how your future will be. In terms of basically the idea is if you're not making enough money to keep your basic necessities met, then you will be living a stressful life, right? And this is a reality of life. So I mean, keeping everything into consideration, definitely it is a good thing to enjoy what you're studying, right? And enjoy where you work. At the same time, the other aspects needs to be considered.
Thank you. And Sister Maria.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, as high school students, you guys are going to be starting off fresh. So, I think aim for 110 so that maybe you'll get, 95. And I think if you start off really with that mindset, I think it's easier to maintain that and just progress. And yeah, feel free to reach out to myself if you have any other questions. I would be very happy to help you, whether it's about psychology or law or university in general. So yeah, best of luck to everybody.
All right, thank you. A big thank you to the both of you for taking out your time and providing this valuable advice to each and every one of us. So thank you again. I'd just like to wrap the program by letting the audience know that if you have any further questions for these professionals or students, you can feel free to message us on our social media platforms, and we can share their personal profiles with you, so you can get in touch with them. Other than that, we'd like to remind you that our last seminar is taking place next Saturday, November 28th at 5:15 p.m. after Maghrib, and that's about health, life science, and medicine. I'd like to give a huge thank you to you all because we have reached a huge milestone in our online platform. We've reached 1,000 subscribers. That's all thanks to you. So we'd like to advise you all to continue sharing, continue referring your friends to our pages, and staying on top of the content that we are providing to each and every one of you. With that being said, thank you for your time. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.